machine. No. Audio level, testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're all good to go? Declan, let me know when you're good. Bad tax policy has implications for everyday people every day, and we are living it right now with what we are calling the patient's tax. Make no mistake, this will have an impact, and today, at short notice, you have the faces of the medical profession in one small part of Sunshine Coast here today. We've prosecuted this because there is no doubt this will have two impacts, the likes of which Queenslanders cannot afford. The first is it'll cost you more to see your GP. The second, it will put pressure on an already overflowing emergency department. Why, in the middle of a health crisis, would you ask people to go into an emergency department when they could be seen by their doctor? And why, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, would you ask them to pay more to see them? It just defies belief. This ruling is completely and utterly at odds with what has been an ongoing practice for a long time. Make no mistake, nothing has changed other than the interpretation of the government. Not one person behind me has changed their business model, not at all. They are doing exactly the same thing as they have done for generations. They have just been through 3 years of holding our health system together. And the thanks they're getting is a new tax, a retrospective ruling that will see many to the wall. What it will do in the short term is it will prevent people from being able to afford to see a doctor. And I was speaking with a clinician the other day at Hervey Bay, and they have already spoken with a patient who needs to see them regularly, who will no longer be able to afford to come into the clinic. That person will be forced into the ED, if at all. There are real consequences for bad policy, and we are living it at the moment in Queensland, and the government must acknowledge, must listen, and it must start to put an end to this, because failure to do so will have consequences across the spectrum. I'll ask Jared to say a few words, mostly as local MP in the area, and then hand over.
Thank you, and thank you, David Crisafulli, Leader of the Opposition, and welcome to the Sunshine Coast again, a frequent visitor to the Sunshine Coast. And I wish it was David was here with better news than meeting business owners and GPs and practice managers across the Sunshine Coast that will lose under this new tax the government are introducing. I want to thank Jan and Nick for having us at Saltwater Medical today. It's their life, it's their blood and bone. They employ locals behind in admin and nurse, and they've also got the GPs that come here. And many Queenslanders know GPs and our medical centres are at the heart of community. Nearly every person in Queensland has had some connection with GPs as they're growing up, and thank you for everything that you did and all the practices behind us did during the COVID pandemic, because without you and without the services you were delivering in our local community, our health system would have buckled more than it did. The strain on our health system would not have been able to cope. So thank you again to Jen and Nick for having us. And listening to Jen talk about Saltwater Medical and how this new tax will impact on people is heart-wrenching. Heart-wrenching when a local business talks about having to possibly close their business because of a new tax. A new tax, which I might add, Cameron Dick promised in 2020, when this government was re-elected, they would introduce no new or increased taxes. This is a sleight-of-hand approach in how they are doing this. Cameron Dick gets up in Parliament and in front of the media and says it's not a new tax, it's just a reinterpretation. Well, a reinterpretation which is going to cost thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars for GP clinics across Queensland is a new tax. And worse still, many GPs and clinic owners, medical practice owners, were told about this just before Christmas. So don't worry about the good work that all the GPs and medical centres did during COVID. Just before Christmas, the state government, this is their Christmas present to our local medicos on the Sunshine Coast. Merry Christmas, here's a retrospective tax you're now going to pay. Well, it's not on. It's not on. And I thank Jen for the presentation today. And as I said, you can't but be moved by Jen's presentation this morning, where she talks about the impact, not only on the business, but the local community. The impact this is going to have on our already stretched medical centres, hospitals, emergency departments is so underestimated by the government. And when you have less GPs in our communities, you have more people going into our hospitals. And the question is for Anastasia Palaszczuk, Cameron Dick and Yvette Darth, are our hospitals going to cope? And the answer to that clearly is no. We are in a health crisis and our hospitals will not cope. The government should be doing everything it can to make sure small business and GP clinics survive. And at the moment, under this new tax, they are at threat. So I would plead with the Premier and I would plead with Cameron Dick, stick to your promise. Cameron Dick said, no new or increased taxes. We have families struggling with the costs of living at the moment, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to know if they can pay the rent 1 week from the next. The last thing we need is a parent or a carer or a grandparent saying, we can't afford to take our child to the doctor, so stay at home and be sick. That's not the community we want to live in. Jen, I might hand over to you for questions.
Sure.
Or if you want to start off with
I
something.
guess, to start us off, just walk us through roughly what we spoke about here today and the overarching concern that you and a lot of your colleagues have.
Yeah, sure. It's my first time in front of cameras like this, so just bear with me. But look, what I spoke about today was a new tax that the state government is basically forcing upon every general practice owner in Queensland. And we've never paid this tax in the past. We are all small businesses, just like the small business that I run now. They did this by, on the eve of Christmas, crowbarring in their own new definition of what constitutes an employee for the purposes of levying payroll tax. Now, I don't know about everybody else's interpretation, but my understanding was that state payroll tax is a tax designed for large businesses with large payrolls. And I can assure you that the payroll of my business does come nowhere near. It's a third of the threshold here in Queensland. But what they've done is they've actually deemed the general practitioners who use the services of my general practice, they're not employees. The prevailing model of general practice in Australia is that GP practices like mine provide a suite of services which include access to a facility and support staffs in return for a fee that I charge them to provide those services. I'm not their employer, and nor should I be. Your GPs, it's so important that they have the clinical autonomy to actually decide on the level of care that a patient needs. But what this ruling actually did was basically conveniently classify these independent medical practitioners as my employees. So instead of having a turnover that's just less than $1 million and a payroll that's 500,000 for me in my business, a small business, that now means that my advice is I have a $40,000 retrospective tax bill that I knew nothing about. It means that I have $100,000 to $150,000 tax liability every year that my business has not accounted for. GPs, if I put their income into that equation, it means I'm probably going to be assessed as having a payroll in this state of about, I don't know, anywhere between $2.5 to $3 million. You can imagine my business model was not designed. We run on thin margins as it is. It is going to have one effect, and well, it's actually got two options for us. Option number one is me and my wife close the door, walk away, hand the keys over, go bankrupt. I'm not a trust fund baby, and I'm not a big corporate. I'm a small business. And we started this because we wanted to make a difference, and we knew we could deliver high quality care. And that's what we've done for the last 6 years, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what we do, and I'm proud of the service that we support our GPs to deliver to our community. And I can tell you that I stood in that car park right over there during COVID. I dealt with all of the anti-vaxxers. I dealt with every single one of the anti-government people who wanted to get up in my face. Meanwhile, I stood behind the Premier and supported everything that she said because it was the right thing to do. And then what happened is, in rain, hail or shine, at great personal expense and at great financial and emotional toll, we basically turned up every single day, every single week, every single month and every single year, and it's 3 years now. We haven't had a holiday for 7 years, and I really hope that the Commissioner of Revenue actually got to have a holiday, because the Christmas present that she gave me was actually a doozy, and I didn't have a break. I have been absolutely running on fight or flight mode for the last 3 weeks, wondering how I'm going to save my business, wondering how I'm not going to pass this cost on to our patients, wondering how I'm going to continue to provide a facility there for the doctors who depend on us to deliver their healthcare. So that's my preamble. I hope I answered your question. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
I guess, how does it feel to know that you could be closing your doors in a matter of weeks or months for something that seems like it's completely out of your control?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not going to be closing the doors. Too many people rely on this practice for us to do that. So what I'm being forced to do right now, against every fibre in my being, is to contemplate putting up prices for patients to see their GP. I'm also forced to go and solicit at least $10,000 worth of expert legal and accounting advice to understand the impact that this is going to have on my small business. And I started this year coming back with a really positive attitude, going, let's go, COVID, we've got that under control. Let's start talking about what we can do to improve our service. We started strategic planning. We had all of these things that we'd put on hold during the pandemic because we were literally just keeping our nostrils above the waterline financially. And so in answer to your question, I don't want it to be put out there that I'm about to close my doors. Some practices in Queensland absolutely will be. But I have the choice of walking away or the choice of putting up prices to price in this tax into my business model, which is what I'm going to do. Because if I don't, I go bankrupt, I lose my house, I lose the future that I've worked for and the business that I've poured my heart and soul into for the last 6 years.
What's been the response, if any, from the local member, Jason Hunt?
I've contacted him 3 times and I've heard nothing.
What do you think of that?
I'll be honest with you, I'm absolutely outraged by the conduct of the state government right now, and I'm outraged that he hasn't had the courtesy to pick up the phone and engage with me. And I want to put this out there very clearly. I'm not interested in politics, right? I'm 50 years of age and I have never once voted for the Liberals in my entire life. So I really thank you guys for turning up and hearing me out on this issue. The reason why is because I believe in the causes that, by and large, the Labor government champions in this country. Access, fair go for all, rights of workers. But here's the thing. If small businesses fold, if general practitioners have nowhere to work, where are people going to get healthcare from? We, in general practice, formed the invisible network. We have the invisible network of infrastructure that supports general practices in this state and this country to deliver their services. Without us, what's the alternative? Where are you going to go to see a GP? Where's a GP going to work in future? You've got 2 options. One option is go down the US path of GPs being employed by big corporates who are answerable to shareholders. I don't think any of us want our GPs to lose their clinical autonomy or be subject to being told what to do by a big corporate. The other option we've got is that GPs are employed by state-run or government-run services. And frankly, I don't really think that's quite the answer either. GP has been organised in this way and has evolved this way over decades for really good reason. The model that we have delivers efficient care to patients. That's all we're interested in, not the politics. And we just want a fair go. We just want to be able to keep doing what we're doing. And personally, I'd prefer they didn't hobble us in the process of doing the important work that we do. I'd really love a thank you for fronting up every day for the last 3 years, because I can tell you for the first 4 months when this pandemic broke out, I didn't know which way was up. I don't think many of us did. But what we did and what my team and what my small business did for this state and our community was we stayed open for face-to-face consultations with patients. Every single day we fronted up. And the reason why we did that, the Premier told us we needed to do that. The Prime Minister told us we should do that. And I believe in the system of government in this country, and I actually believe that the governments, I have to believe that they just have had some sort of a, brain lapse to not understand the consequences of this decision on every single Queenslander. 9 in 10 Queenslanders went to see their GPs this last year. We were the backbone of the biggest, largest emergency vaccination rollout in our country's history. And we did that at our own cost. I lost money, and the weeks when we were short, I took it out of my mortgage to make sure my real employees got paid. So that's why I think this is really unfair.
How much do your patients pay now for an appointment, and how much would it go up if this change stays in?
In our personal model, now we are what's called a private billing practice, and there's about 3 different models. There's bulk billing, mixed billing and private billing. We made the decision to be private billing, which means all of our patients pay a gap over and above the Medicare rebate to access the services of the GPs that consult from Saltwater Medical. The reason why we did that is my wife is an excellent GP, and we knew that the prevailing model of GP and the pressures that have been heaped onto general practice and the profession of general practice itself over the last 2 decades, where successive governments of every colour have devalued our profession and our contribution and what we do to keep our communities safe. So we have a different model, and we knew that 6 minutes, double booked appointments, which is literally which is the model that a bulk billing clinic has to use in order to be able to pay the electric light bill. So 6 minutes, double booked, and Medicare picks up the tab for that. Our model, we wanted to give patients more time, because we know that in 6 minutes you cannot have a meaningful consultation with a person. You cannot take a history, understand, do an examination, deal with it, prescribe a plan, give them the information that they need. 6 minutes is unrealistic. And so we said, you know what, we're going to give our patients more time. So ours is a 20-minute model for a standard appointment. A patient gets a rebate for a 20-minute appointment, which is basically a standard appointment, which amounts to about $38 from Medicare. Hasn't been indexed for the last 2 decades appropriately. If that had been, that rebate would now be worth double, okay, which is about what we charge for that standard appointment. It's what we have to charge in order to deliver a quality service, and that's what we're about. So what we're putting it up by, is that your question? So in our model, I've done the modelling, and we have to put our patient fees up by around about 8%. So that means about $8 more all of our patients will be paying to see the GP in my model. Now, let me talk you through a bulk billing model, which is actually non-existent. The bulk billing practices, the few of them that are left in this state, and a lot of them are in regional centres that are already suffering from a chronic shortage of general practitioners. That particular model, there is no way for that practice who is sitting behind that model to recoup more, because that Medicare benefit, they can't say to Medicare, oh, we're going to put $8 onto that so that we can pay the tax that the state government has just put onto it. So they're going broke at a much more rapid rate than us. So what this is actually going to cause is a series of consequences that are really obvious, and I don't know why the government doesn't understand these consequences. One, all of those bulk billing practices will shut the doors. They simply, you cannot get blood from a stone. There's nothing more to give. They will shut the doors. Access in those rural communities, those regional places, gone. GP, no longer available. The other options that we have is to put up patient fees, and that's what we have elected to do, to keep the doors open and to keep our GPs in, with the infrastructure they need to deliver their services. And then somewhere in between is what's called a mixed billing model, and they will be doing the same thing that we're doing. We do not have basements full of cash. We are not Colombian drug lords with basements full of cash. We really aren't. I don't have the $40,000 to pay the retrospective tax bill, and nor do I have $150,000 worth of profit in my business to absorb this. So I have no choice but to pass it on or just close the doors and walk away. And I'm not walking away, and I'm mad as hell, and I'm personally right now doing my very best to unite every single general practice in this state to fight back, to push back. We don't want to be involved in politics. It's the last thing we want to be involved in. But we've got no choice.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks all. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Just got a question on this one, Dave. So the Queensland Revenue Office...
Sorry, just one sec. Do we
payroll...
want them here? A health question on this issue, and then I'll get these guys to...
Good idea.
For political questions, so stick around for the health question.
So the Queensland Revenue Office is ongoing payroll tax exemptions for particular sectors would only create distortions that would increase the tax burden on other Queenslanders. How do you respond to that?
Sounds like political mumbo-jumbo straight out of the Treasurer's office. If a business model has been built generationally around a set of rules, and then the only thing that changes is the application of that rules, that looks and sounds like a new tax.
It is.
And I'm not sure about the School of Economics the Treasurer went to, but if a business is operating on thin margins and you put an impost on a business, there's only one place it can come from, and that's the patient. And make no mistake, there are people who will not see their GP because of this, and there are people who will be funneled into an already broken ED system. This is madness. And look, this is going to follow a similar playbook to the renters tax, and I'm happy to re-prosecute that, because for many months we mounted the case that to impose a renters tax in the middle of a housing crisis was nuts. The Treasurer defended it, he belittled us, he went through all the machinations, and in the end he was humiliated. I would rather the same thing doesn't happen, and I would rather the decision be made immediately, because this is not going to go away. And there are many GPs who have thousands of people who trust them, rely on them and need them, and they will use their weight of force to mount the case. And so the Treasurer should either realise that this is a new tax, it is a grab, and retreat now, or it's going to end exactly the same way. And no one wins when that happens, certainly not the Treasurer. Guys, thanks very much. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks. We'll be back inside soon. Thanks. Thanks. We'll run away. Thanks for your time, guys. Thank you very much. Over to you.
David, I guess staying on the topic of health, what were your thoughts on the state government's announcement this morning to bolster the health workforce?
Well, I might ask the Deputy to make some comments as well, but we'll always back any opportunity to get people into the health system. It's a noble profession, and they need to know that they're respected and they're valued. Likewise, we have a real issue at the moment attracting and retaining people to work for Queensland Health and encouraging people to be a GP. And imposing a new tax in the middle of a health crisis isn't going to help in that regard. So the single best thing the state government can do to attract and retain GPs is to give them incentives to want to be able to serve their clients well. You want to make a comment?
Sure. Look, this is straight out of the playbook of the Labor government that we've seen in the last 8 years. So an analogy is on the youth justice crisis we had. Huge issues just before Christmas. The Premier makes an announcement, we're going to introduce legislation, goes on a holiday overseas for 5 weeks, come back. We've seen her at one press conference since Christmas, and that was a press conference where she said Cabinet had discussed it. No decision had been made about the youth justice. So then we see today, with this issue now bubbling away, this is straight out of the Labor playbook about how to try and take this out of the media's attention. They announced a series of new doctors and healthcare frontline workers this morning. They gave a figure of about 1,000. But when you delve into the detail, and the devil is always in the detail with the Labor state government, it turns out that the actual net increase is somewhat about 3%. They are completely lying to people. The other analogy I'll give you is this. They promise, when we talk about youth crime and the crime crisis across Queensland, they're putting on hundreds of additional police officers. Again, when you delve into the detail based on their own budget last year, July last year's state budget shows that police numbers actually net have declined by 12 in 2 years. So with the Labor government, it's all show. It's never about what the reality is, and it's always the optics. So they stand up this morning and say we've got 1,000 new frontline workers, but when you delve into the detail, it shows they've had a huge lack of investment in 8 years. And we say to the Premier, this will not get this issue. This announcement today will not get this issue of the patient's tax out of the media attention. You saw today, there are people right around Queensland that will be campaigning against this patient's tax. And for the Premier to think that her little stunt this morning, as she always does, will fix the issue, it won't. And it won't let it go away. Yes, we welcome any additional frontline workers to try and help and solve the issues of the health crisis. But I think it's a little too late for the Premier to do that this morning.
Thank you. Can you tell us about the concerns of maternity services being closed or put on bypass in regional Queensland, and also what would you like to see?
I'd like to see Queensland women be able to have a baby how, where and when they want to. That's the Queensland that I stand for. And the fact that there's been 37 maternity services closed by the Labor Party since the late 90s, I despair. And today I see the Health Minister trumpeting the locum going to Gladstone, a step in the right direction. I still ask the question, when will Gladstone women be able to have a baby how, where and when they want to? Because they can't yet. And the choice between having a C-section or driving the Bruce Highway and playing Russian roulette is still not a full choice for women in a city of 60,000 people. And in the last 24 hours, we've had that road closed. Imagine being on your way to Rocky in labour and having the road closed. Imagine the trauma for a young woman. Gladstone is a city of 60,000 people, and they deserve the maternity services they've had there for a generation, as do many other little communities. And I'm sorry, but I keep hearing the word bypass. Something cannot be on bypass indefinitely. It looks a lot like closures, and that's the case in Chinchilla and many other places at the moment.
Taking you back to the announcement this morning about the 800 or so medical interns and then the couple of hundred ambulance officers, is that enough given that we already know that in regional Queensland I think there's a 15% shortfall? Yeah,
well, I think Jared explained the issue well, and that is when you look at the attrition rate, we really need to do more to keep pace with a health system that is crumbling from underinvestment and poor planning over 8 years. So there is no doubt that there is a lot more we need to do. But it starts with attracting and retaining GPs and medical professionals right across the system to want to work for Queensland Health. And that's why one of our solutions is putting doctors and nurses back in charge. We want them to feel valued. We want them to feel respected. We want people to look at working for Queensland Health as a calling and something that is a noble service. And they have to be well respected to do so. And in real terms, the health system is under pressure, the likes of which we have never seen before. And it was under pressure long before COVID. And COVID has been that added complexity over and above it. But we need to do a bucket load more to attract and retain staff and give them the power to heal the crisis that is in health at the moment.
This decision by the Revenue Office came out just before Christmas. It's now end of January. Why has it taken the opposition this long to, I suppose, realise this is a major issue?
It's before Christmas, and we prosecuted it before Christmas, both in the Parliament, but also I was one of the first. One of my GPs was one of the first who got a whopping big bill, including a 5-year retrospective tax bill. Now, that first element was taken off the table after we worked with the AMAQ, but there's still a long way to go. And their business model has been built in good faith. And in the same way we did with the renters tax, we'll be diligent, methodical. It's not my style to yell and scream. It is my style to make reasoned arguments. And this one is a reasoned argument. And it's going to follow the same playbook because you just can't ask GPs to absorb this. It is going to come at the feet of patients who cannot afford it.
Just talking crime up north, there was a crane smashed over the weekend, so the teens then posted a video on Snapchat. The owners say that crime is skyrocketing out of control. They don't know what the answer is, but something has to be done. What's your response to that?
The answer is consequences for action, making breach of bail an offence, ensuring that there are early intervention programs to help kids turn their life around, but consequences at the other end of the spectrum to stop this. And if you want proof of how much these young thugs laugh at the laws, not only are they not trying to hide, they post about it. That shows how broken the system is. It is a system that does not have consequences for actions, and until that changes, nothing will change.
Do you support children's courts being opened up so crime cases can be reported to by Queenslanders, and do you think it would be in the public interest?
The Premier campaigned 8 years ago on being open and transparent. Think about how much she has walked away from that promise. And the fact that the government does not want Queenslanders to know what is happening inside their courts tells you that they know the laws are broken, and that's why the system is broken. And let me just park one of the issues that the Premier attempted to say, that somehow it's about naming children. No one is talking about shining the light on the name of an individual child. This is about being transparent and shining a light on the broken laws. And that way Parliament can fix them. And if the government were willing to be transparent, they would have no problems with allowing the courts to be able to do that. That would make a more transparent system. It would show that the laws are deficient, and it would allow us to work on them. So the answer is you bet.
And well, on that same note, do you think it would help aid the public's understanding of the youth justice system?
Of course. And the public would see how flawed the laws are and how magistrates have their hands tied behind their backs because of the watering down of those laws in 2015. So we have less police on the streets, we have weaker laws, and we have the government not willing to allow Queenslanders to know what's happening inside those courts. That's a recipe for disaster.
David, for the Gold Coast, are you worried about the rise in schoolyard fights and that being posted to social media?
The escalation of young people putting crimes of all different... I'll start that again. The escalation of posting crimes of all different levels on social media is concerning. And we run the risk of a generation of young people who don't see any consequence for their behaviour online. It's as though they think there is a separate world between the one they live in and the one they post about. And whilst that is only a minority of kids, that is deeply concerning. And no one wants to see a schoolyard with violence, and no one wants to see the schoolyard become the set of the next Hollywood fight blockbuster. And that's why this has to be dealt with quickly, and it has to be nipped in the bud.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thanks very much for your
you.
time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jason,
Go ahead and say
Thanks for your
bye.
time, guys. Thanks for hanging around.
Cheers. Sorry to keep you delayed.